There are no fire alarms planned for this evening. Should the alarm sound, please leave via the nearest available emergency exit. Two of the closest exits are through the glass doors behind you to my left and through the double doors onto the riverside behind you. Please muster at Café des Amis. Members of the public are welcome to make their own recordings of the meeting using whatever non-disruptive methods they think are suitable. I have to remind everyone present that this meeting is being filmed and made available to view in live and archive form via the Council's website. If you are seated in the public gallery, it is possible that the cameras may pick up your image and you are deemed to be consenting to being filmed and your image and sound recordings webcast. The meeting is also being minuted. The Westgate Garden gates on the riverside are locked at sunset. Members of the public must leave the Guildhall by the side exit behind the glass door. Move on to item 1, and that's apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
We have apologies from Councillor James Flanagan, Chair.
Thank you. And do we have any substitutes?
We have Councillor Steph Jupe as a substitute for Councillor Flanagan.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest by members or officers?
There were none received in advance, Chair.
And do we have any further declarations from the floor?
Nope.
For just checking for item 6, were there members of the working group in the room on item 6?
I would, Councillor Naomi Smith. I was on the working group for Westbere for the bread and cheese field petition from Westbere Parish Council.
Thank you, Naomi. Councillor Ord.
Ditto. Thank you.
Councillor Stockley.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and again.
Thank you for that. Let's move on to item 4, public participation. Do we have any speakers for any of the items?
We have one speaker, Chair.
Thank you. Move on to item 5, minutes of previous meeting. And they are minutes for the meeting that's held on 7th of August. Are they a true record and can these be agreed by general assent? Or do we have any? By general assent, thank you. We move swiftly on to item 6, Westbere and Hersden Community Governance Review, CGR, final decision. That's to consider the report of the Director of Corporate Services and Head of Corporate Governance. And I now invite public speaker Ian McLean to step forward and speak, please. Ian is from the Westbere Village Preservation Society. And you have 3 minutes.
Councillors, thank you for this opportunity to speak on this matter. My name is Ian McLean. I'm the Chair of the Westbere Village Preservation Society, the organisation that initiated the petition which led to the boundary review. First, I'd like to thank the City Council team and the councillors for their work in conducting the review. We appreciate their professionalism, acknowledge the time and costs spent on the review. One of Westbere Village Preservation Society's charitable objectives is to educate the public in the geography, history, natural history and architecture of the area of benefit. In the time, the people in Westbere, the community, it changes. However, the history, the heritage does not. What we've hoped to do is ensure that this connection between the current Westbere residents and Westbere's history is maintained, understood and appreciated. The support from the residents for returning the bread and cheese field to Westbere has been remarkable and a great achievement in the community. We are aware that the consideration will be given tonight to extend the boundary beyond the bread and cheese field through options 2A and 2B. However, we are satisfied that the original recommendation to return the field, which was put to full council, met the objectives of our petition, and we don't therefore feel mandated to support a further period of consultation. We are also mindful of the additional costs and time incurred through a third level of consultation. We remain hopeful to see the bread and cheese field return to Westbere. Thank you.
Thank you so much for speaking and coming this evening. I now move this over to Matthew Archer, Head of Corporate Governance, and also is present Tricia Marshall, Head of Paid Services and Director of Corporate Services. If Matthew would like to introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So, by way of reminder, we're looking here at the boundary on page 12 of your agenda tonight. That was the petition boundary, which you can see in figure 1. When we did the stage 1 consultation, 92% of those who responded supported the proposal, and you'll recall from the stage 1 report that there was compelling evidence that was provided in support of that. That recommendation went to council and was supported, so we then consulted on the draft recommendation to transfer the bread and cheese field as outlined there from Hurstone Parish Council to Westbere. And you can see the impact of that on figure 2 on the same page, page 12. The stage 2 responses, smaller response for this, perhaps not surprisingly. 9 supporting, 2 against. Those who were supporting included the Westbere Parish Council. Those opposing included Hurstone, and it was the first time that they had expressed a view one way or the other on this. Their rationale was just questioning the motive and whether it was connected to the local plan or not. We've been quite clear that we're looking at this completely separate to the local plan issues, and they are being dealt with separately. The other letter of opposition came from the developers who have an interest in the site at the current time, and they cited some reasons connected to the history of the entire site that's being petitioned, and pointing out that only a proportion of that site is actually connected to the history, and it's perhaps less clear for the remainder of the site. And also that the boundaries that currently are in place are perfectly reasonable and could remain, which is true, they could. They also cited some reasoning around the petition number, and we've dealt with that in the report. Basically, they were pointing out that it only just achieved the threshold. But once the threshold had been achieved, then the petitions numbered stopped. They also felt that the timing was illogical, but we have 12 months to complete a review. Therefore, we have no choice but to perform this concurrently with the local plan consultation. So in response to the findings from stage 2, we've then looked at the community governance review criteria and assessed against the tests whether we believe that the recommendations that were put forward in stage 1, after stage 1, still remain. I think in terms of the identities and interests of the community, there was no new evidence put forward, but the evidence that already was in play as part of the review was compelling and showed that there were strong links between the charities, the parish council, and the Westbere Village residents. That may only pertain to a proportion of the site. We don't know, but nonetheless, when you're considering whether to transfer a boundary or not, you can take that into account, and it's just as valid whether it applies to the whole or part. In terms of the effective and convenient community governance, all the links have been shown to be associated with the Westbere Parish Council. No evidential links to the Hurstone Parish Council, sorry. So therefore, again, the recommendation remains. So that left the third criteria, which was around the impact on community cohesion, size, population, and boundaries. And it's boundaries, really, which is the only point of focus here. When the working group looked at the aerial photograph on page 16, you can see there that the area outlined in A is the area that is undisputedly part of the sort of historic connections. B is the remainder of the site that's being petitioned for. And there is a road that goes, which is indicated in red on your photograph there as line with C on it, reference C. That's a road that goes from the A28 down to the railway line. And there was a question posed by the working group about whether that might be a suitable alternative boundary to the one that's been petitioned, insofar as it provides a clear delineation between the development on the one side and the green space on the other. So the working group felt that it would be appropriate to put that forward in the report as an alternative to the one to the proposal that has already been considered as part of the petition. And it's represented in two options, 2A and 2B. So option 1, sorry, just to be clear, on page 18, is the proposal as put in the petition. And if you were to support option 1 tonight, then that recommendation would go forward to council, and if they agreed it, then that would conclude the review. And we would then issue a reorganisation order to put that into effect. So that's option 1. Option 2, A and B, are basically two alternatives proposing a slightly broader boundary that takes advantage of the road and the rail line. I think all are valid, so they've all been put forward for you to consider. And in terms of the working group recommendation, they lean towards option 2, but not so decisively that they felt that option 1 was not either viable or desirable. So what's presented to you in the recommendations is an either-or scenario where you could go with either option 1 or option 2, A and B. And option 3, which is retention of the boundary on the Hurston side, wasn't supported because it was felt that all of the evidence pointed towards an in-principle decision to transfer to Westbere. So it's really a case of the proposition to you from the working group is agree the principle and then either agree the petition outline as put, which would go forward to council, or if you feel that the other boundaries are worth consideration, then we would propose a short period of additional consultation, and then either one of option 1, option 2A or option 2B would be put forward to you as a final proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew, for presenting that. Before I propose either of the options, I will open up to discussion to find out your views. Do we have any views from the floor? Fastest hand first. I'll go from left to right. So, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I feel that we should go for option 1. It's straightforward. It's what was petitioned for, and I would be happy with delegation authority with head of paid service and head of corporate governance to implement the recommendation and deal with any incidental matters. So I also think it's consistent with opinions we've had before, and it draws an end to this process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Auld, and then we'll go to Councillor Stockley.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Edwards. In my short tenure as councillor, I've been involved in 2 clinical governance reviews. The first one involving Whitstable Town Council, where we consulted on the petition as presented to us, and then afterwards got involved in a detailed discussion, I won't go into too much about that, about a subsidiary recommendation that came forward. I think we're in danger of doing the same thing here. And I think the lesson that I've taken from this is that petitioners need to be very careful in what they present to us to be decided upon. We are presented with a petition, we have looked at that petition as presented to us, and we have come to a conclusion and a recommendation based on that. I think that if we start looking at things outside of the initial petition, then we get in all sorts of difficulties. So for that reason, and I have reconsidered this, having been a member of the working group and toyed with the idea of supporting some of the other options, but I think we should just do the job we were tasked with, and that means I support option 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Auld. Councillor Stockley.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to echo the Speaker's thoughts on the amount of work that's gone in on this, especially Matthew Archer's team. I think it's well above and beyond the call. I agree option 1 is what is petitioned for, and indeed it seems a fairly obvious choice. I think to go further into consultation, especially seeing as the second consultation was less well supported, I think would be a waste of taxpayers' money, to be frank. But I do support option 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stockley. Do we have any further? Councillor Smith?
I'd like to echo what particularly my colleagues on the working group said, and thank Matthew and his team for the work that they got, to get us here. And I also feel quite strongly that it's quite a drawn-out process over a field, and I would hope that we can sort of today go for option 1, and then just it happens, and we're not prolonging and going out to further things and further meetings and further consultation when only 11 people responded to the second stage. Okay. So that's how I feel too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Any more views from the floor? I'd also like to thank the team for the work that's been put in so far. In light of the discussion, and we've heard from the public speaker, Ian McLean, who was the original petitioner, who would like to, from Westbere Village Preservation Society, sides with option 1 and from the floor. So I would like to propose option 1, that the land identified as the Bread and Cheese Field site as petitioned area is transferred to the Westbere Parish. That delegated authority is granted to the head of paid service and head of corporate governance to implement the recommendations and deal with any incidental matters. Can I have a seconder, please? From the floor, Councillor Smith, thank you. And we shall take that to a recorded vote.
So that's carried unanimously, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, councillors, and thank you for the public speaker. If you'd like to leave now so you don't have to sit through our next item, I will pause for a minute to allow you to depart. I'd like to thank you on behalf of all the councillors in the committee for the petition and for speaking this evening. Thank you. So now we move on to item 7, senior management structure options, and that's to consider the report of head of paid service. Officer Tricia, head of paid service and director of corporate services. I invite the officer to make their introduction.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully you've all read the report. There's quite a lot of information in there. I'm just going to highlight a few points. I think probably the first one you might be wondering is why this is coming to General Purposes Committee. And because General Purposes Committee is sort of everything that doesn't fit in everywhere else. So you have a very eclectic sort of agenda to deal with. So the senior management structure doesn't fit into anyone else's terms of reference. So it comes to General Purposes Committee. It might be something that we look at, or other people look at in a future constitution review, but for the moment it falls under the responsibility of General Purposes Committee. So that's why the report is coming to you. Having said that, there has been extensive discussion and consultation with cabinet members, particularly the leader and the deputy leader, and with the senior managers in the council, and discussions between the leader and the deputy leader and senior managers. So whilst this report is in my name, it's the result of a lot of discussion and consultation that's been going on, and it's in agreement with all of that. So that's the sort of scene. You'll be considering the recommendations here and the options here, and you'll be making recommendations onto full council, because it's full council that will make the ultimate decision, but you'll be considering and recommending. I thought I might explain a bit about the timetable, because it looks a little bit truncated. So as a council, you must have 3 statutory officers. You must have your monitoring officer, who is making sure you're keeping within the law and everything. You must have a chief finance officer or the 151 officer who's making sure that you've got a sustainable budget and you're staying within that. And the third one is the head of paid service, which is probably the one you hear least about, because the other two seem relatively clear. Make sure you're legal, make sure you're sticking within your budget. The head of paid services is technically about making sure that the council has the right staff resources in place to deliver the council services. And like the two other officers, they can, if they feel the need to, make a report to council, a formal report to council about officer resources. Having said that, it is incredibly rare and much rarer than a monitoring officer or a chief finance officer making a report. But it's one of those three statutory officers that you must have. So as you know, I'm leaving at the end of December. So you must have a head of paid service from the 1st of January. So your last full council meeting before the 1st of January is on the 24th of October, because your next one is actually in the first week of January. So you need a head of paid service to be ready to be in place for the 1st of January. And so at that council meeting, you need to, as a full council, resolve on a head of paid service. So that's why it's coming to you tonight, so you can consider those options, make a recommendation through to full council. You also have an appointments committee, which makes appointments to things like Whitstable Harbour Board as well, but also makes the senior management appointments in the council. So that's the committee that will actually appoint a head of paid service. So because of various issues around people being on leave and being at conference and so on, the only date we've managed to get for the appointments committee is tomorrow. Now, if you agree the recommendations in the report tonight, then the interview tomorrow for head of paid service will be for a permanent head of paid service. If you decide you don't like the recommendations tonight and you want to explore something different, then you'd have the interview tomorrow for a temporary interim head of paid service until you sort out what it is you want to do. But either way, you need to have someone either on a permanent or an interim basis as your head of paid service from the 1st of January. And it seems better to try and fit in with the existing meeting scheduled rather than call you all in for a special council meeting sometime in November and December. So that's why the timetabling looks a bit odd. So in the report, you can see gone through a number of different options that have been discussed, and councils can decide their own senior management structure. There's no particular structure. Most of them have one with a chief executive, but a few don't have a chief executive, and that's how we are currently. And the proposal in the report is to reduce from 3 directors down to 2 directors. So the existing 3 director posts will be deleted. There'll be 2 new posts created of joint chief executive. And there'll also be a new post created to support the implementation of cross-cutting corporate plan objectives. So obviously as a council, you've just agreed a new corporate plan. Some of the things in there are very related to services. Others go across the council, and we actually need people in place to implement those actions. So that's what that role would be. So, as I said, you can see all the pros and cons set out in the report and the implications. But just in summary, the preferred option gives continuity for councillors, for officers, and in terms of service delivery. If you change the structure and that then results, or you kept with the existing 3 director structure, and that results in an external recruitment, that would take a number of months to come through, and there's a long period of uncertainty there for staff and officers, which inevitably would lead to slowing down in terms of service improvements and corporate plan actions. Going down from 3 to 2 directors effectively will reduce your senior management costs, and that saving will be reinvested in that delivery post. And you would expect there'd be a saving alongside that as well, but it will enable delivery. And I've mentioned about uncertainty if you move to a chief executive role. So I'm happy to take any questions. I don't know whether you're going to propose the recommendations first.
Thank you for presenting that. I'm happy to propose option 2 from the chair. One, that the Appointments Committee on 9th of October considers applications for the appointment of the Head of Paid Service for recommendation to full council. 2, that the senior management structure set out in the report incorporating 2 joint chief executive positions be implemented on the 1st of January 2025, that's option 2, and that the existing 3 director posts be deleted. 3, that Peter Davis be appointed as returning officer and electoral registration officer from the 1st of January 2025. 4, that the head of paid service be given delegated authority to make the necessary consequent changes to the scheme of delegations for the council officers in Part 8 of the Constitution to reflect the new structure. And 5, that the leader and deputy leader be given delegated authority to set the remuneration of the joint chief executive posts after receiving feedback from the external job evaluation panel, subject to the total costs of the new senior management structure, including the new implementation post being contained within the existing budget for the senior management structure. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Edwards, thank you for seconding. I'll open up to the floor for debate, and then if we can come to any questions. Thank you. Councillor Stockley, you felt pressured because I looked at you in a do you have some questions type of way?
I do have a few. Firstly, I'm a little uncomfortable with this because this isn't, option 2 is not what was envisaged when the restructuring took place. And indeed, nor is it what the Labour and Liberal councillors at the time said they wanted. At the time in 2022, both parties said that they would reintroduce the post of chief executive when and if they became power. I'm just wondering why now they have the opportunity as the lead group that this is not seen to be any longer possible or indeed desirable. I'm concerned because, in my view, option 2 will only work if we have a strong leader model. And without commenting on our current leader, obviously these arrangements may go well beyond this council into the next and beyond that. And at the moment, the way this is laid out, I have marked several passages, but I'm not going to read them out because you're quite capable of reading them yourself. The introduction on page 44, second paragraph, where it lays out everything that the officers will be doing, senior officers, I can't find any mention of political oversight in this document. I might be missing it, but we are looking at a document that is heavily steered towards what the officers in the council do and how they do it, which is fair enough, but I'm concerned about the political oversight element of it. I have no criticism of our 3 senior officers, and I wouldn't like it to be thought that I am criticising them, because I'm not. I think they've done a stand-up job over the last 2 years through some very difficult times. But I just find it difficult to support this because it's not what is envisaged. It's not what was suggested in 2022. I think personally, the more you devolve power to people, and okay, we're going from 3 to 2, but I still think basically this isn't an ideal situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stockley. Before we come to those answers, I'm going to ask if there's any other views from the chair, and then we can have them all in the round. No other views from the floor. So, Councillor Stockley, comments that it wasn't what was originally proposed from the administration. It needs a strong leadership model. Where's the political oversight? And there's no criticism of the officers as he spoke.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think if you look back at the current structure and the proposed structure, they're quite unusual, but not unknown in local government. There have been other cases where there have been joint chief executives in post at other councils. I'm not aware of which political colour those councils were. I don't think they were necessarily all of one colour. As I said, I think this has come about as a result of a lot of discussion around these three possible options. So keeping the current structure, moving to the two joint chief executives, moving to a chief executive model, all of those have been considered and discussed at quite some length. So I think probably what's happened is, you know, going back to the current structure that was set up under the previous administration, things have moved on since then and looking at different opportunities. In terms of the chief executive model, I think, again, you know, people might have said that's what they wanted in an ideal world at one stage, but also I think pragmatism comes in. And this is sort of a compromise solution, I guess, that gives everyone the continuity, but I think most crucially focuses on actually getting services delivered, getting corporate plan actions delivered, rather than having the upheaval of introducing a chief executive who could be internally appointed or could be externally appointed. But either way, that would cause considerable uncertainty in the organisation, considerable rethinking by officers about what's our future direction going to be, and so on. In terms of political oversight, this does nothing to change the boundaries between what officers do and what councillors do. The same arrangements will be in place as are in place at the moment, the same briefing arrangements, the same taking political soundings that you would expect would all continue with this new arrangement. So I don't see that as being an issue, and that's why the report focuses on the officer structure rather than on the councillor side of it, because the councillor arrangements will remain unchanged. They obviously evolve over time, but broadly they remain unchanged. Thank you, Chair. Hopefully it answers the questions. Thank
you. Do you have supplementaries?
I think that's covered it. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay. Thank you. Just to recap, you didn't mention financial reasons, but within the paper it says that this is the most efficient option looking at the financial packages that there are. But it's welcoming to hear that you say that it's still an efficient operating model to be able to deliver the services, and there'll be no change that there'll be a member-led authority. There's no change there. So I've got a seconder. Shall we take it to the vote? So we will be voting on, as proposed previously, option 2. Would you like me to go through the entire recommendation again? No. Okay. Sure.
So that vote is carried, Chair, with 6 in favour, 2 against and 1 abstention.
Thank you. That is carried. We now move on to item 8, any other urgent business to be dealt with in public? No. We have no other urgent business. Item 9, exclusion of press and public should not be required. So item 10 is null and void, no other urgent business that falls under the exemption provision of the Local Government Act 1972 or Freedom of Information Act 2000 or both. That's it. Have a good evening.